Now raise your hands if when you're stressed you tend to eat more. Raise your hand if when you're stressed you tend to eat less. Okay? The difference that you just saw, actually a relatively good balance, has nothing to do with your personality. We suspect it has not a lick to do with an independent or an individual factor, individual difference factor. It has probably more to do with the type of stress you're experiencing. Now the best kind of explanation of why this would be in simple English, non-scientific terms, comes from Robert Sapolsky. His book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. If you haven't read that book, it's in your reference list. Very entertaining book, very helpful. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. But the idea is this, is that when we experience stress, our body is designed for survival. Therefore, we're experiencing a threat in some ways. We have a release of corticotropin releasing factor, CRF. Well, that has an immediate appetite suppressive effect. Why? Because if our body is thinking automatically, unless it learns otherwise, this threat is life-threatening, that's its default, then having a full belly is not really that important. Well, CRF, in addition to suppressing your appetite, is also, just moments later, going to stimulate your pituitary, and you have an activated pituitary, what's going to happen but an elevation of glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids increase appetite. So really the proposal is this, not personality, but the type of stress you're experiencing, because if your stress is especially intense, then CRF is going to play more of a dominant role and suppress appetite. But if you're experiencing a periodic stress, moderate levels of stress, then CRF is still there, but glucocorticoids, which, if you will, have a longer half-life than CRF, are going to play a more dominant role. It's going to then stimulate appetite. So it's more about the patterning and the intensity of stressors that will influence how stress will get you to eat more or not be that hungry. What else does stress do but impair the quality of our sleep? Whether we're in bed more or less, what is fairly universal is it impairs the quality of our sleep. Now, the poorer our sleep quality, the lower our level of leptin is. You deprive people of sleep, what do you find? Leptin levels drop. Well, that's our body's natural ability, hormonally speaking, to kind of tell us we're full. So, if in combination with our poor sleep and low leptin levels, those occur when stress is high, we also tend to eat faster when our stress is high. It's no wonder then that we consume more calories per sitting when stress is high than when it's not. Now, it's not your fault, right? Basically, there is a reason when you're stressed, you don't reach for the broccoli, you go for the brownie, right? Because when we intake calorie-dense, simple carbohydrate foods, what happens? But within 20-30 minutes, we have a surge of dopamine. We feel good. We're riding that high, but we've all been there, right? Have a little too much of a good thing. Wow. Some of us are actually more susceptible then to say, no, I prefer to feel better. Let me get more dopamine. How did I do that again? Oh, 6 more cookies. And so forth. Now, that's going to kind of create potential dysregulation of blood sugar. That's going to only contribute to atherosclerosis and a variety of bad things, including the hyperglycemia is going to stimulate that reactive oxidative stress that's going to promote aging in a variety of ways. Now, the following kind of bullet point apparently only applies to women and not to men. Alyssa Appel at Stanford University, she's published most of this data. And what's interesting is that when men or women, when we ingest carbohydrates, some of that certainly will get deposited as fat equally throughout the body. When you elevate stress or increase cortisol in a variety of ways in men and they consume carbohydrates, it still is going to be processed and will be deposited as fat throughout the body. But for women, you have both carbohydrate consumption and elevations of cortisol. Now, disproportionately, that fat gets placed in your belly, abdominal fat. That's going to increase your waist-hip ratio, which increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. So it's kind of a deadly combination that, again, it changes how the fat's distributed for women when you're doing stress-related eating versus for men. And finally, I mean, how are people thinking about what they're putting in their mouths? Brian Wansink, W-A-N-S-I-N-K. It's not in your reference list. So if you're interested, you might want to write this. Very good read. His book about mindless eating. Brian Wansink is affectionately referred to in the research community as the Chinese buffet researcher. Because early in his career, he and his team would go to a Chinese restaurant, and without the patrons knowing it, they were being observed by Wansink and his team. What they had, they debriefed them afterwards. But what the research team had done was manipulate the size of the plates at the head of the buffet line. And they made available only two sides of dramatically different plates. One was a small salad-sized plate. The other was a jumbo dinner-sized plate. Okay? Now it turns out that people with body mass indexes below 32, when they chose the plate, they would choose equally between the small and the large plate. People with BMIs 32 and higher universally chose the larger plate. Everyone would fill their plate and sit down to eat. Well, it turns out people with BMIs in the mid-20 in the healthy range would more often sit down with their back to the buffet table, whereas those people with BMIs in the mid-30s sat down watching the buffet. Right? What about the chicken wing study? Free chicken wings, come on down, all you can eat. From there. Well, you went there, and you were randomly assigned to one of two different tables. Didn't matter which table you were at, you got a big old pile of your favorite flavored chicken wings, okay? And then a discard plate. Now what was different about these two tables is that one table had a good waitress. She did what she was instructed to do. That is, she would never allow you to have more than 2 wings that you were done with. Put it down, put it down. No more than 2 on that plate. She would swoop by, take it away, and give you a clean discard plate. That bad waitress, don't know where she was, but she would just let the carnage pile up, right? Turns out if you could actually see the consequence of your own behavior, you ate 35% fewer chicken wings. And finally, the popcorn and movie study. Free movie, popcorn, come on down. You were randomly sat in one of 4 different theaters. Now you saw the same movie all the time. But in Theater A, those people got a medium-sized bag of fresh buttered popcorn. Theater B got a bucket of fresh buttered popcorn. Theater C got a medium-sized bag of 9-day-old stale popcorn. Theater D got a bucket of stale old popcorn. People who have body mass indexes below 30, generally healthy range, are listening more to their internal cues and not as much influenced by the environmental cues. That is, when you give them a jumbo bucket of fresh buttered popcorn, they eat more than if you give them a medium-sized bag, but not that much more. When you give them the stale stuff, they stay away. They don't eat a lot of that. People with BMIs in the mid-30s and higher are more influenced by their environmental cues than they realize. Because lo and behold, what happens? When you give them a bucket of fresh buttered popcorn, they eat the bucket. Well, not the buckets, but they eat the popcorn in the bucket. And they eat almost as much of the stale stuff as the fresh buttered stuff. Right? So on that, enjoy your lunch, right? No. Actually, about being mindful. One example, just one question. When you're about to order something, buy something in the market, or sit down and start consuming something, ask yourself just one question. Am I eating this for the taste or because I'm hungry? Eating cookies, brownies, cookies, chips, whatever, for the taste is not nearly as big of a problem as if you're eating those things because you're hungry. Eating them for taste, you're likely to eat less of it. If you're eating those calorie-dense foods because you're hungry, you're really in trouble.